Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Peter Fadoul to the show. Peter is the Associate Manager of the Sustainability and Circular Economy Program at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Corporate Citizenship Center, where he contributes to the Foundation's original research, programming, content, and convenings in corporate sustainability. Peter brings particular expertise in climate solutions, including clean energy and electrified transportation, and circular economy themes, including recycling and recovery system optimization, circular business models, and alternative materials innovation. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Raj. Thanks for having me.
Peter, thank you for being on. Peter, where are you currently located?
I am in my row home on 13th Street in Washington, D.C., so close to downtown.
You're in the middle of the excitement, aren't you?
Certainly. Just trying to weather the storm here.
How's the weather in DC?
Oh, it's perfect today, actually. Fall is probably the best season weather-wise in this area, and I grew up in Northern Virginia, so I'm quite familiar with it.
Well, good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. So, Peter, I'd like to open the show by asking my guest the following question. If you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I would say that one aspect about me that's important to what I do now. I come from a pretty international background, so my family is actually half Lebanese on my father's side, and so I grew up with sort of a global upbringing and perspective, and I think that informs in many ways what I do now. You know, these are global challenges that we face in terms of reaching a sustainable future, and they require kind of communal and global solutions. And I'd say the desire to get involved in this industry in sustainability really crystallized in my study abroad trips. I was very fortunate to be able to study in Argentina and South Africa. So it was very eye-opening experiences.
Can you perhaps share some of those eye-opening experiences? What influenced you specifically?
Sure. So I actually have one story that's pretty good representation of what I learned there. So in Argentina, we stayed with host families there, and the family that I was paired with was just an older woman by the name of Estella, who was an Argentinian woman who lived in the province of Cordoba her whole life, which is the second biggest province in Argentina. And it was just her by herself at that time. Her kids had moved out, and I was living with her for the whole summer of the study abroad trip. And during one instance, I had accidentally left the lights on in my bedroom, and Estella saw that and came to chastise me and was very upset and berating me completely in Spanish. And I heard her out and turned the lights off and went about my day, and felt a bit ashamed, but it didn't really click with me, because I feel like that's a quite common habit in the United States, is to leave the lights on. So I went about my day, and a few weeks later, it actually happened again, and I left the lights on. And this time, Estella came to me and was, instead of angry and upset this time, she was truly sad and fearful. And I realized it was because she literally could not afford to be wasting energy like that. And that moment really hit me and has sit with me for um, ever since that time. And it just really crystallized, how much people care for resources and energy in other countries, and how we could maybe do a better job of that in the United States. And I knew I had always wanted to do something mission based with my career, but that was when it truly clicked with me, what exactly to focus on.
You know, this might date me a little, but I was telling my children a story recently about how I remember being a small child in London, and this was in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we had to put in London, the currency comes in pounds and pence. And we had to put a 50 pence piece in a meter in order to get gas in the house.
Goodness.
And so being conscious about how much energy we use, whether it's electric or gas, was extremely important to us. And I remember when we moved to America, I moved to America much later, when in my late teens, but I was surprised at, just to your point, people leaving the lights on, leaving the water running. We got our first apartment and it was, quote unquote, all bills paid. And it's like you hit the utility lottery, because you
Right.
can't believe that, wait, you get unlimited hot water and unlimited electricity, and, you know, don't even mention call waiting. That's a whole other thing. But just having unlimited utilities was a very, very, quote unquote, foreign concept at the time.
Certainly. And I think that experiences that kind of break you out of that comfort zone can be food for the soul, and definitely nurturing of other perspectives that are important to have in mind.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. So, Peter, can you give the audience an overview of the U.S. Chamber Foundation and your role at the organization?
Sure. So I work for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I'm the associate manager of the Sustainability and Circular Economy program there. The Chamber Foundation is the 501c3 affiliate of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the largest trade association in the world. It's been the voice of business for thousands of companies across the United States and internationally, for over a decade. And whereas our counterparts at the chamber focus on policy advocacy and policy design, we focus completely on the kind of what I characterize as best practice education and amplification for the private sector, specifically regarding kind of the key corporate responsibility and societal goals that businesses are helping achieve. So we like to say that we help businesses do well by doing good. I work in what's called the Corporate Citizenship Center, and we cover a wide range of issues, including diversity and inclusion, economic empowerment, disaster response and resilience, tech for good, and my portfolio, which is the sustainability and circular economy program. Operationally, in terms of what we actually do on a day to day, we have a couple different pillars that we uphold. So we produce original research that fills kind of unique knowledge gaps in the field. Other long and short form content, such as editorials or blogs or webinars, events such as large scale conferences, which are obviously virtual nowadays, and more intimate roundtables where we can dive deep on certain issues. And then continuing in that kind of collaboration vein, coalitions that we form to solve certain problems through sustained coordination between usually a cross-sector group of companies. And it's important to note that we don't just work with the private sector and companies, though that is sort of our core. We work very closely with local communities, academic institutions and research groups, other NGO experts, and government officials in order to channel kind of both the experts and the practitioners on the private sector side, and be the conduit between them.
So you mentioned many issues that are top of mind right now: sustainability, circular economy, diversity and inclusion. Can you share from a tactical perspective how you help businesses navigate some of these issues?
Yeah, I would say that one of the biggest strengths of the chamber and the chamber foundation is being that voice of the business community and giving them a safe space to work collaboratively on these issues. And again, channeling those experts from other sectors and then packaging those learnings up to help other businesses and the general public accomplish those same goals, whether it's in sustainability or in diversity and inclusion, economic empowerment, again. So that's kind of our role as a 501c3 is how do we channel these terrific best practices from all of these private sector actors and help them overcome their key challenges, but also help other businesses do the same.
So let's say I'm a business owner and I want to perhaps get engaged regarding sustainability or learn about how I can perhaps have a more circular economy within my own organization. How would you walk me through that? How does the foundation walk a business through that?
Yeah, I would say that we assemble a really robust bank of resources across all of those kind of main core competencies that I listed, whether it's white papers, case studies. Those are a big one for us is case studies because we think those uh, are the kind of the most replicable pieces of content that we have, where you get a glimpse into what the leaders in the space, which are typically larger companies. You know, you think of the Googles and the Microsofts that you hear in the news with their extremely robust sustainability commitments and efforts, and then we try to package those up and present them in a way that's helpful for businesses that are, say, just getting started, and also convening those businesses in the same room as the leaders proves to be a really inspiring and useful conversation.
So it sounds like part of your program is almost like a mentoring relationship.
Right. I would say that it's more about kind of getting the umbrella of resources together and then getting these companies in the room with one another so the experts can kind of work out their questions with one another. And we find that peer-to-peer advisory and collaboration is extremely powerful in helping businesses kind of move along the pathway of sustainability from laggard to leader, if you will.
And how have you seen businesses navigating, issues around sustainability, especially during this time of COVID?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I would say that it's been one of the pleasant surprises of this year that we are seeing an acceleration of these sustainability efforts in spite of the pandemic. And I think that a lot of that is coming from the fact that the pandemic and other monumental events of this year are making all facets of society, especially businesses, re-examine kind of what's imperative, and building for the future is one of those imperatives, right? So I think that myself and a number of other pundits in the space could have easily anticipated a slowdown in sustainability efforts for this year, but in fact, we're seeing a true acceleration of those sustainability efforts. And I think you'll see that contrasted. In the beginning of the year and late last year, you saw some monumental commitments from, say, Microsoft or JP Morgan Chase, or BlackRock, and those have only we've seen no decrease in the kind of number of those commitments and frequency across other actors. We've in fact seen an increase in those numbers.
Now, I'm going to switch gears here a little. When I was looking through your website, I came across this Milkman model. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, in terms of like a circular economy and take back programs.
Yes. Can you share a little bit about that Milkman model and the future of consumption?
Yeah, so I can use that analogy to speak to kind of the circular economy in general. I think what that is enumerating, that piece might have been specifically might have been before my time here, but I would say that in terms of the circular economy, that is one tactic for designing waste out of the system. So how do we provide goods and services to consumers without generating the waste typically associated with those products? And those typically are associated with consumer packaged goods, but there's ways to do this with things like capital equipment and capital assets as well. I'll give you one really interesting example. There is a company called Algramo that's based in Chile, and what they do is they essentially partner with consumer packaged goods companies to provide staple products and staple goods to consumers in reusable containers that have smart chips embedded in them, so they can actually track those containers. And what it does is it allows for more flexibility for these consumers to get the goods that they need without having to pay for that packaging. There's actually a phenomenon, they call it, it's essentially a poverty tax is how it would be translated in English, but essentially these low income consumers have to buy in small quantities usually, and of these staple products, and every time that they are paying for those goods, they are paying in a small part for the packaging that they come in as well. And with Algramo, they are able to buy solely what they need and remove that kind of packaging cost that's associated with buying those products in small quantities each time. So I think that's a really interesting example of intersectionality between kind of sustainability and economic empowerment, where you're able to these consumers are able to reap both the financial and environmental benefits of the circular economy.
While you were speaking, I was thinking about, it's been said a few times that the first trillionaire is going to be someone that's involved in the, broadly speaking, clean tech, green tech, sustainability sector. And while I don't encourage anyone just to chase financial gains, I think that there are so many different opportunities, especially with technology. You mentioned the smart chips coming to light now, where you know perhaps companies or individuals can really take a hard look at what could be considered end of life for a product, and think about how, instead of just end of life and end up in the trash or in the waste or in the landfill, what does end of life look like? And again, I love the idea about the milkman, because again, the story of London, we always used to put the bottles out, get new bottles every day. We would wash the bottles, they would go back, and it was just part of life. Same as carrying. Now we look at taking our own grocery bags to the grocery store as almost normal now. A lot of people that I know have these reusable bags, but slowly but surely over time, if we as a whole or the collective can start thinking more about that end of life. And I think the part that you really touched on there that's really important is the inclusivity part of it. And what I mean by that is that not just the people that can afford to participate in this movement, but also considering the people that can't afford to participate, and how we can include them in the movement.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's very well said. And there's numerous other examples of that. that span things like energy as well that I'm happy to touch on. But I
Yes,
think that Algramo example was really good.
please do share the energy stories.
Yeah, so one of my personal favorites. So this helps the overcome the challenge of what's called an energy burden, and the higher energy burden that some underserved communities and financially challenged families face. So energy burden is essentially the share of household income that is spent on electricity, heating and cooling, transportation, etc. And Google has a really awesome program. They have acquired Nest, which is the smart thermostat company, obviously, and they've engaged in a partnership with Consumers Energy, which is a utility in Michigan, to provide. I think it's something like 100,000 of these smart thermostats to electricity customers across their region, and many of which are part of underserved communities or low income communities. And they provide them for free, and what they're able to do there is essentially um, use all of the features that these smart thermostats have kind of innately to save money on energy bills and reduce kind of heating and cooling loads across these different households. And they're also able to engage in an amount of demand response, which for folks who aren't familiar is essentially any kind of system that manages the flow of energy into um, customers' endpoint of use for those products. So, for instance, they're able to shift heating and cooling use away from peak load times where energy is at a higher cost for these customers. And so through all those features, they're able to use these smart thermostats, which they provided for free, to save those underserved customers money on their energy bills, and then also and reduce that energy burden, but also realize some really tremendous environmental benefits. Heating and cooling is the single largest load share for households across the United States. That's true.
I think demand response is going to become a real necessity going forward. I am honestly, in full transparency, apprehensive or hesitant about letting Google or any other large company, from a data perspective. But if they could clean that, if they could allow me to have that peace of mind regarding the data, I think there's a great opportunity there. The examples I've given is that, I live in a master plan community, and I think if we all had, smart thermostats, and the thermostat kind of knew our patterns, coming and goings of the house, who's in the house, not in the house, and there is a load issue like in the middle of summer, they can adjust the thermostats by a couple of degrees higher. That would essentially relieve the load on the grid. So I really do think that DR is going to play a much larger role going forward.
Certainly, that's kind of on that. It's already taken root in many places in the United States, but I think it's on that cusp of really taking hold kind of nationwide as we move forward.
Absolutely. So, Peter, I'm going to switch gears here and come to the crux of our conversation, which is the why behind what you do. You mentioned your travels earlier, but, I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile and I see your background. You've been involved in energy work, and now you're involved with the US Foundation. With your skill set, you could be doing many other things. So, what motivates you? What drives you? What's your why to stay engaged in this line of work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. Personally, and just in terms of being involved in sustainability in general, I'd say that this prospect of helping solve one of, if not the biggest challenge we're facing and will face as a society in achieving a sustainable future, that is a super humbling thing for me, and something I take great pride in being a part of. And then in terms of kind of private sector sustainability or corporate sustainability, one of the things that convinced me to get involved in this line of work was just the leadership demonstrated by some of the largest companies in the world to set and achieve these ambitious sustainability goals, and really how important that is to the movement of sustainability as a whole. I mean, these are truly market and paradigm shifting efforts that we get to be a part of in terms of amplifying them and helping them overcome kind of key challenges, and also spreading their methods to other companies, other cities, other NGOs. So that is really why I'd say I got involved in corporate sustainability. And then that's not to say that there aren't other very, very important sectors. I started my career by helping start up a nonprofit in Charlottesville called Generation 180 that was focused on helping consumers and communities embrace their role in the clean energy transition. So we talked a lot about consumer level technologies like residential solar and personal electric vehicles, and how those have kind of changed the game in terms of individual decarbonization. But also we had some really impactful community level programming. I managed a program that was focused on solar development and deployment on K through 12 schools throughout the country. So again, bringing it back to kind of the whole picture, I am humbled to be a part of the corporate sustainability world currently, just due to the kind of momentum that it can generate. But there are also a number of incredible sectors and great work going on within those sectors to advance a sustainable future.
Where does your desire to help stem from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it dates back to when I was younger. I certainly was like many kids who wanted to be a superhero or a police officer when they grew up. And help fight bad guys. But as I grew up, I realized there were a lot of different ways to kind of help people, and this just feels like one of the best ways to help the most people in mass. Though the time horizons on how these efforts will help in the future are quite long. I still take a lot of pride in kind of setting us up for success now.
Well, you know what they say, not all superheroes wear capes.
Well, I can hardly claim that label compared to some of the healthcare workers and others that have played such an important role in this moving forward. So I would say that those are that's just another very crucial in an immediate way in which people are being superheroes out there these days.
Strongly agree with you. So, Peter, what are some of the most valuable lessons that you would say you've learned about yourself on your journey?
Yeah, about myself, I would say that I've grasped a pretty good understanding of all of the different aspects there are to sustainability, and it's not just about energy consumption or fuel consumption in transportation, or waste to landfill. It's the combination of all of those different aspects of sustainability working in harmony with one another, and being able, I consider myself a storyteller in some regards. That's a lot of what we do, and being able to tell stories around how those can all fit together and how they can work in concert and complement one another, is something that I've been very fortunate to learn about as my career has progressed.
I love the idea of storytelling. I think it's the most powerful way to convey information.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and I would say that those, again, the case I mentioned case studies earlier in the interview. Those are some of our what we think is some of the most powerful storytelling out there, is having those kind of real world ethnographic stories that we can tell to help demonstrate that these efforts are possible. They have tremendous benefits, and here's how to achieve them. We kind of call it actionable storytelling, as I like to lovingly refer to it. Um, and I know we are about to release our latest case study, which will be focused on climate action broadly, and that will actually examine about 7 different companies from different representative sectors and how they're approaching that through either transportation and logistics, through UPS, manufacturing through Royal DSM, telecommunications from AT&T's perspective, among several others. So, and all of those sectors that are in the case study are super important to decarbonization and zero waste goals. So we're excited for that to come together, and it actually should be released in the next week or so.
I look forward to seeing the study, and by the time that comes out, I should be publishing this episode. So I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Certainly, that would be great.
So, 2 last questions. One, let's say there's a business owner right now listening in, thinking how they can get involved in the circular economy or sustainable future, sustainability. What would be the best step for them regarding getting in touch with you to perhaps learn more?
Yeah, certainly. I would say visit the Chamber Foundation's digital properties and site. I'm also happy to provide my contact info, and that will be readily available and should be already on our site, and things like my LinkedIn. So I would say that's one way to get plugged into the Chamber Foundation and the great work that we do generally. Another thing I would say, and I'm glad you asked it this way, I would say that folks looking to get involved with sustainability in their company, I would say there's a huge opportunity to look to where your company can make, whether it's your company or your organization, your government agency, look to where you can make the most impact, even outside of your own kind of enterprise operations or your direct footprint. So I can give you an example of that. Citibank and Wells Fargo, for example, are two obviously of the biggest banks in the United States, and they are part of the kind of close supporter network of companies that we work with, and they both have really ambitious sustainability goals, and a large part of those goals focus on their kind of what I call enterprise sustainability, or what their direct footprint is. But they also have really significant environmental finance goals. So Citibank, for instance, I think just set a new goal of about $250 billion worth of environmental finance that they've committed to between now and I believe 2025. And that's building on a $100 billion commitment that they made between 2015 and 2020 that they achieved early. So you can see where they're not only focusing on, say, their bank branches and kind of the obvious environmental footprint they have, but they're also flexing their financial muscles and really knowing what they're good at and using that to affect kind of a sustainable future for everyone. Another key example that I love, National Geographic has obviously a huge, maybe the world's most renowned storytelling platform, and they use that to tell stories about the environment and how it's changing and solutions we need to implement to protect that environment. And they're a partner that we've worked with as well. We had some of their speakers on our latest Sustainability Summit series to talk through some of that, how they approach that through their grant making and their storytelling efforts. So that's just another example of where they realize kind of their core strength and are using that to affect sustainability as a whole.
I appreciate you sharing those examples. So, last question. If you could share some advice or words of wisdom with the audience, it could be professional or personal, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say professionally, back to what I just said, if you can put kind of critical thought into that and approach your leaders with ideas on how to get your company involved in these efforts, that would be a tremendous win if we did that across the country and across the world, even especially for companies that are not fully engaged in these issues already. And then personally, I would just say keep the faith. I'd say we're at a really interesting time in history at this kind of crucial outset of the decade of action, or the decade to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we were also hit with this pandemic and the other crucial events of this year in 2020. And when you see the kind of acceleration that is happening in sustainability among all of the other crucial issues like diversity and inclusion, like economic empowerment, it can be really heartening and inspiring. So look to those examples and draw energy from them, and use that to either affect these positive changes in your personal life or within your company, like I mentioned before.
Peter, I think keep the faith is a great place to end. I've so enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks so much, Raj. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be on the podcast.
Thank you, Peter. Before we go, I'm excited to share that we've launched our comic strip, The Adventures of Mira and Nexi. You can find the first issue at our website, nexuspmg.com, under the Original Content tab. Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.